Roxanne Nelson. Are there any other cults that are under the same scrutiny as Scientology? Who or what decides that a person is ready to go on to the next step on the bridge? Thanks for the questions, Roxanne. I'm not really sure I understand your first question because, yeah, there's a lot of cults that are under a lot of scrutiny. So Scientology is kind of big in the media because Tom Cruise and John Travolta and other celebrities are connected with it, and it's had a lot of high-profile media lately. But, yeah, there's other cults that are under a lot of scrutiny. As far as this second half question that you asked, though, as to who decides, who moves, when the person moves on in Scientology, this is kind of interesting, and I want to explain this whole thing because I've never really gotten into it before. In the Church of Scientology, a person will come in and they will get counseling or auditing, right? And they move up this bridge to total freedom, this chart with all these services on it, and there's all these different levels. And the way that this works is, I thought you guys might find this interesting. When a person goes in for auditing, there's another person, there's a third person. You have the auditor and you have the pre-clearer, the person who's getting the auditing, right? But there's a third person, and this person is called the case supervisor. And the way this works is, the case supervisor is like the quarterback on the case. He's the guy who's in an ivory tower, who's in a room that is not, he's not ever talking to the pre-clear. He's not ever having conversations with the guy. In fact, he doesn't even want to. He doesn't want to talk to the guy. He doesn't want to, generally speaking, it's best if he doesn't even know him. The auditor takes the pre-clear in for sessions or for interviews where questions will be asked of the person to determine what kind of auditing to do or whether auditing needs to be repaired or fixed or something like that. So these interviews get done and then the actual auditing gets done. All of this stuff is written down, right? All of the answers that the pre-clear gives to the questions that are asked of him are written down in a shorthand sort of form on worksheets. Those worksheets for every single interview or session go into a folder. That folder is what goes back and is what goes to the case supervisor. So the case supervisor sits in a room and gets folders all day long of all the different people who are being audited by that organization. He opens the folder, and inside the folder there's all kinds of stuff, and I won't get into everything that's in a folder because there's a lot in there. It's not just the worksheets of the interviews, but there's also forms that lay out step by step what this person is going to be audited on. That's called a program. The program is written by the case supervisor. The overall master program for every single person who comes into Scientology is this thing that Hubbard wrote called the grade chart, or the bridge to total freedom. And I'll show a graphic of it online, in the video here so you can see what I'm talking about. That is all the steps that a person needs to go through in order to get all the way up to clear and OT, or operating thetan. But those steps consist of, if those are the broad actions, then the case supervisor is the one who works on the minutia, the step by step by step that Joe Public needs to do in order to move up this bridge, because there's hundreds and hundreds of different processes and actions that get done on a person as they go through all these steps. And if they run into trouble along the way, the case supervisor is the one who directs what to do to fix the trouble. And the case supervisor is somebody who's already trained as an auditor, and then Hubbard wrote a whole bunch of other issues on how to do this case supervision and how to be a supervisor for somebody's case. So that's kind of the system. So if a guy shows up and he's going to get auditing, he pays for a chunk of hours of auditing, and he says, I want to go up this bridge. So the auditor says, great, and they do an interview and they find out all about his life and what's going on and that sort of thing. And then that goes to the case supervisor, who writes out a program of what to do, what actual processes to run on the pre-clear in order to move him along, right? Based on what's going on in his life and what the grade chart, the bridge, actually says to do, right? He's the one who is making these determinations. Now, let's say that The guy is progressing well, and he is on what's called grade 0, which is a series of processes that are run. It takes hours and hours and hours and hours to do to get, and they all have to do with the subject of communication. That's what grade 0 covers, is communication. So there might be processes like, recall a time that you had a hard time communicating with somebody, right? And the guy recalls it, and then they do stuff with that. I mean, there's all kinds of different processes, right? The guy does all these processes, or he does a lot of the processes, and let's say at some point along the line, the pre-clear is in the session with the auditor, and he says, oh my God, I feel great about communication now. I feel so wonderful. I can communicate with anybody ever about anything, right? Well, that happens to be the end result of what that grade 0 is trying to accomplish, is the person saying that. So when he says it, right, then, and there's other things that they look at, but I'm not going to get all weird and technical about this because it's all just, Scientology Faldy-roll. But when what looks like the end result of what they're doing is reached, the folder goes back to the case supervisor with all the information, and he's the one who says, good, he's done with grade 0 now, and give him a pass on it. And then the guy goes and he does a little formal process called attesting, where he goes and he sees another person called an examiner, and they put him on the meter, and he says, yes, I'm done with grade 0, and the examiner makes sure that he's done. And then that little process is done, and then the folder goes back to the case supervisor, who says, good, everything's great. Now you get to move on with grade 1, because that's the one that comes after grade 0, right? And that addresses problems. So now he's going to start a whole nother grade with a whole new set of processes that are going to talk about and address problems, right? He's all done with communication now. And that's how you move through each of the levels of Scientology up to clear. And then the guy goes clear, right? And he's, I'm clear, it's all great, I don't have a reactive mind anymore. And then you proceed on the OT levels. And even on the OT levels, you're auditing yourself. So, 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8 are solo. You're auditing yourself. And OT 4 and 5 are done with an auditor. Regardless of that, you're still keeping worksheets. Even when you're auditing yourself, you're holding the cans and you're doing the meter and you're running the session, you're the one keeping worksheets. Those worksheets go into a folder. That folder goes to a case supervisor, and the case supervisor is the one who's telling you what to do in every one of your sessions. So there's always a case supervisor, always. And even when a person is doing the purification rundown, there's a case supervisor, right? When a person's sweating out in the sauna every day, he goes and he fills out a report of what happened, what he felt like in the sauna, how he felt, what he experienced, did anything mental happen to him while he was in the sauna sweating. All that gets put into a worksheet. That goes into the folder goes to the case supervisor. It comes back from the case supervisor saying, okay, let's bump up his vitamins, bump up the niacin, and get him through the purification rundown. So every auditing action that happens on a person in Scientology is supervised by a case supervisor. And that's who determines how a person runs and when they're done with each of the actions as a person moves up the line. So I thought that might be of interest to explain that whole thing, since I've never talked about that before, and it's a good question.